In this Wolcen build guide, we're going to be covering a mage build that focuses on the use of fire to nuke down enemies from a distance. Wolcen has a complex passive skill tree Gate of Fates that can be difficult to figure out, and many mechanics are not always easy to min-max. In this build guide, I'll explain how to get the most from this build, so that if you've been struggling to find a good mage build, then this guide is for you. The general concept behind this build is using the skill Consuming Embers to take down large groups of enemies and bosses from a distance or at close range. A fireball cast when using the skill is considered a projectile, and we use that to our advantage. There are many passive skills in the Gate of Fates that increases projectile damage, and when combined with skills that increase spell damage, you can make Consuming Embers hit for a respectable amount, especially when it crits. When combat begins, you'll open with Anomaly to group enemies together and then go to town with Consuming Embers and just spam it until you run out of willpower, at which point you'll use a potion or attack with a staff if you really need to, which you shouldn't often. You'll alternate between Anomaly and Bulwark of Dawn for ranged AoEs, throwing out Consuming Embers, only using Aether Jump when necessary to gain a bit of willpower. Mages probably benefit the most from Ferocity and Wisdom. Ferocity will increase your critical chance with both Consuming Embers, Anomaly, and Bulwark of Dawn, and Wisdom will increase your ailment chance, which in this case would be with Burning, Shocked, and Weakness. We are not overly concerned with burning early on in the game because you want to kill enemies in 1 or 2 fireballs and not wait for them to burn out. However, you want to do good ailment chance because you want to gain damage stacks from ailments when enemies die via the Immortal Offering passive in the Kabbalist skill tree. Attributes in Wolcen and Lords of Mayhem suffer from diminishing returns, so it's best to alternate between Ferocity and Wisdom to lessen the amount you'll suffer from it. Both Wisdom and Ferocity will passively increase the damage of Consuming Embers by a linear amount as well, but you'll likely want to keep Wisdom just higher as Sorcerer Armor usually comes with this stat, and that way it'll give you more damage. In this section, we'll take a look at what skills should be on your skill bar to make this build work. Because you'll be spamming Consuming Embers, there is some wiggle room in what you can put, but I've included the ones that I feel work best. Consuming Embers. The whole build revolves around this skill, so this is a no-brainer. This skill, like a couple of other spells, is considered a projectile, so gains damage from passives that increase projectile damage. It also has nearly instant cast time with no cooldown, so it can be spammed at will as long as you have the willpower. I like to take the Meteor Shower skill modifier as soon as I can to add an additional projectile which fans out slightly. Once you gain Archeon's teachings, this will increase to 3 projectiles, albeit for slightly reduced damage, and will cause the spell to fan out even more. This makes it ideal to take out packs of enemies and works well at shotgunning bosses when point blank and you can hit them with all 3 projectiles at once. Arsonist's Daydream is nice for the reduced willpower cost and allowing you to spam a bit more before you run out of willpower. Catching Spark is great for increased cast speed, and Heart Piercer makes each fireball hit incredibly hard in an AoE, which is very effective. Lastly, you want Object of Desire because it'll boost your damage by about 20% for each fireball, and all other spells. Anomaly. This spell's damage is just impressive and works exceptionally well for any build. It pulls enemies inward, grouping them into a tight ball while dealing damage over time, and can apply the Shock status ailment if you take the Echo Wave Pattern skill modifier. You'll want this skill to do lightning damage to take advantage of passives in Oracle of Trinity and Kabbalist. You'll open with this ability to group up enemies before you open fire with Consuming Embers. The only downside to the skill is its extremely long cooldown, which means you'll likely want cooldown reduction on your gear. Taking the skill modifier Rending of Matter will allow you to cast this skill twice per cooldown, which helps tremendously and makes it a must for this build. You can also use this at will later on in the game if you have good cooldown reduction because of this one modifier. I like to take passives that increase the duration and size for more effectiveness, and these are Dislocating Threads and Temporal Dilation. Additionally, I like to grab Event Horizon to further damage enemies at the moment the spell is cast. Livor Mortis. Livor Mortis is extremely tanky and is a great way to keep enemies off you while you nuke them down in harder fights. You'd be surprised how much damage it can take before it goes down, even with no points into the Plaguebringer passive skill tree. And even then, you can recast it nearly instantly. I like to take passives that increase its health and threat. These are Glutton Undying, Foul Guardian, Sacrifice, and Token of Shame. Make sure to keep this out at all times, you never know when you might need it. Aether Jump. One of the weaknesses of mage builds is that they are squishy and we are not prioritizing stamina management, so you'll run out of dodge rolls in harder fights like bosses and die. The solution to that is Aether Jump. It allows you to teleport instantly and doesn't cost stamina. By alternating between rolling and Aether Jump, you can get yourself out of some tight jams when you need to. It also replenishes willpower, so it can be great when you need it to gain a bit back. You'll want to take the Continuum Expertise passive to reduce the cooldown of this ability so that you can use it more frequently. Taking Feeding the Aether and Auspex's Arrogance will gain willpower back when using this. Bulwark of Dawn. This ability is a great way to heal yourself, which you will need to do from time to time when your potion is on cooldown. Additionally, it can provide other benefits that make it worth having for a squishy mage. It's also good in a party and it can heal other players. I like taking the Sacred Grounds modifier to make this skill deal damage as well as heal. Additionally, if you take Vanguard of the Morning Star, you can cast it at range just like Anomaly. This allows you to alternate between these two ranged AoEs and gives you another ailment you can apply in Weakness, further boosting your damage via Immortal Offering. Figuring out how to align your Gate of Fates is one of, if not the hardest part of making a build in Wolcen, and generally takes a respec or two before gotten right. In this section, I want to show you how to set this up for maximum performance. Scholar. Scholar is the natural choice to begin for any spellcaster, and you don't gain Consuming Embers immediately, so this will allow you to boost damage of Annihilation until you gain it. You don't want to focus on the unique nodes here, but instead pick up the passives Heightened Concentration and Adept, making your way into the Ranger skill tree. These passives increase your spell damage, ailment damage, spell casting speed, and overall damage, so they are great for any mage build. Emotional Intelligence and Steadfast are great as well, so grab these too. Ranger. The goal within Ranger is to get to Archeon's teachings as quickly as possible to gain an additional projectile. You want to follow the shoot to kill path to get there and take Deadly Aim and Bullseye, which are right next to it after getting there. Next, you want to grab Puncturing Shot, which really helps to boost your damage, as it allows the fireballs to pass through an enemy and hit the next. Warlock. After Ranger, you'll head into the Warlock tree via Scholar. This tree is just full of great passives for a mage. Elemental damage increases, spell cost reduction, spell damage, more willpower, and also some other passives. You can spend 15 points easily in this tree, and you should aim to grab at least Reigning in the Darkness, Faith Leech, and Duty to Exterminate. Also grab Dark Calling and Self-Restraint to further reduce spell cost. Oracle of Trinity. Next, you'll be moving into the Oracle of Trinity skill tree, grabbing the passives you prefer, but you definitely want to get Audacity and Descent for more cost reduction. This is another tree that you can spend 10 plus points in easy, and so you'll be investing there for a while. Grab Ancient Fervor and do Allegiance before you go. Sentinel. The next tree you'll place points into is Sentinel in order to pick up some more projectile damage, but mostly because this will grant you access to the Kabbalist skill tree with just a handful of points. Kabbalist. Kabbalist deals mainly with ailments and ailment damage, which you will want at this point. There are also some nice passives that provide spell damage and spell cost reduction, as well as Force Shield, which synergize nicely. You absolutely want Grievous Afflictions and Immortal Offering. These are two of the most important skills for this build, and they really boost damage. Power of the First Men helps apply ailments, so grab it, and come back to this tree later to take passives that boost ailment damage, but skip them when you first arrive. Soldier. There are some good passives there that boost critical damage, and you'll want the wildcard for more critical chance. Crits are very important to this build, and this really helps to get them more often. You'll eventually want to grab Capable for the willpower cost reduction as well, but you can come back for them. Assassin. In Assassin, you want to head for Merciless Lethality immediately to gain a whopping plus 100% critical damage. You lose damage on non-crits, but it's not as much as you think, and you should have near 50% critical chance at this point. Eos. Eos is next on our list because we further increase spell damage and sacred damage here, which benefits Bulwark of Dawn. Additionally, there is an exceptional passive in Dawn's Pious Striker that allows you to execute enemies that fall below 15% health. I cannot understate how great this is against bosses. In this section, we'll be covering the type of equipment that you want for the Oracle of Flames mage build. Flat damage increases of Fire, Frost, and Lightning are important because most modifiers are additive, not multiplicative, meaning that when you do plus 15% damage with projectiles, it gets added to plus 12% spell damage, and then multiplied against the base value of the spell. So you need to increase the base value by finding equipment that has plus X fire damage, plus Y frost damage, or plus Z lightning damage to make your percentage increases more valuable. As mentioned earlier, you'll want a staff for this build because they fire projectiles and are affected by passives that increase projectile damage, and they will fire 2 projectiles once you have Archeon's teachings. Additionally, it reduces the time you transfer willpower to rage, meaning you will begin to regain willpower much faster once it finishes. Catalysts are actually penalized this way, and take about double the time for this to happen, which is why I don't recommend using one. You want to look for a staff with bonuses that add flat damage to fire and lightning ideally, but frost is also okay, just not in large quantities. The reason for this is that you cannot stack freeze on enemies, so you cannot take advantage of Immortal Offering if you freeze. You want to make sure that you have 2 spell damage type bonuses because this will give your spells the most damage. Head over to Xanafer Stark and reroll sockets until you get 3 offensive 2 slots and drop Lapis Lazuli into them for increased lightning damage. You want lightning damage because you need to ensure that you shock enemies with Anomaly, and if lightning is not the number 1 or number 2 highest in damage, you will not. On your armor, you're going to want plus elemental damage early on, but you won't be able to find it late game. Look for armor with plus % damage and plus wisdom. Remember that wisdom gives you 0.5% damage per point, so 40 wisdom is actually plus 20% damage. Rage and willpower cost reduction is the other thing you'll want in order to spam more fireballs, with cooldown reduction also being good but not as important. You're going to want to look for armor with Force Shield on it because many of the passives you'll take in the Gate of Fates will improve this. Additionally, you want sockets with defense 3 on it in order to add more force shield with gems. On your jewelry, you want the same things you find on your staff: flat damage, fire, lightning, or frost, as well as things like willpower regeneration or critical damage. Reroll support 2 sockets on them and place amethyst in them for further willpower regeneration. Adding percentage fire damage or lightning damage is not as useful here, and the increases are very little. You will benefit more from the increased willpower. Make sure to keep and reclaim lapis lazuli and amethyst whenever you find them. Check Yennefer Stark when you return to town to see if she's refreshed her inventory and contains them, and buy them if you can. It's important to avoid using frost spells with this build because you can only have 2 accords up from the passive skill Ancient Fervor and Dual Allegiance. If you cast a frost spell, you will gain increased ailment chance, but you want the increased critical chance from lightning and increased overall damage from fire instead. Consider adding some sacred damage to your staff with Silverstone to make sure that Bulwark of Dawn does burning and weakness ailments on enemies and not shock and burning. You won't be able to get weakness if you don't, and this will add a stack to Immortal Offering, increasing your damage by a further 25%. Remember to level up Consuming Embers using extra Primordial Affinity at Demetra. Players have a tendency to hold on to it and do nothing with it when they could be using it to unlock extra skill modifier points for their skills, and Consuming Embers only get stronger and stronger, so level it up manually when you have extra Primordial Affinity. Lastly, remember to use your willpower potions liberally to regain willpower. They will fill up by striking enemies, which you will do in spades. Pop it often and stay topped up in order to keep casting. You don't want to auto-attack if you can help it. Be sure to check out our other Wolcen Lords of Mayhem guides and stay tuned for more builds.